This episode of the Digital Instruction Network is sponsored by REMC Association of Michigan. For more than 50 years, they have been providing digital media services as well as educator professional learning to educators and schools all over the state of Michigan. For more information on their programs, including the 21 Things program, the Classroom Makers program, and Playdates, please visit remc.org. That's REMC.org. All right, well, welcome back. This is 517 EdTech's Digital Instruction Network. I am Andrew Shaver, Instruction and Technology Coach at Ingham Intermediate School District, joined, as always, by the legendary Christy Lobdell, Assistive Technology at Eaton RISA, and Allison Rogers, a.k.a. Allison the Great, Instructional Technology Specialist up at Clinton County RISA. And we are joined today by Kristina Foley, who teaches face-to-face third grade, and Keyan Roberts, who teaches remote fifth grade, both at Explorer Elementary in Williamston. And we have reached the stage of our COVID school year where we've had to add a qualifier. You're not just a third grade teacher, you are the face-to-face third grade teacher. And you're not just a fifth grade teacher, you are the remote fifth grade teacher, because this is where we're at in this whole adventure, and quite an adventure it's been. So we want to spend some time today kind of talking about what that adventure has looked like in Williamston. Williamston is a district that is a medium-sized school district that has kind of had students back and had to take some breaks and gone in and out with their different models a little bit. And we just want to talk a little bit about what that experience has been like, about what types of different strategies you've had to use, what things I'd be interested in, what types of things that you've explored that have kind of made it the distance. Like, yeah, we put this thing in place and it kind of works no matter whether we're in person or not in person, and what that collaboration has looked like. So, well, thanks for joining us, Kristina and Keyan. How are things going?
They're going.
They're going.
That's the theme of this year, right?
They haven't quit going. They just keep going.
Yep.
There's always a pause after that question every time.
Every time. I ask it every time.
Or should I just be, courteous here?
I would like to create a compilation video that just shows all the answers to that question. I start that way every single time. So why don't you guys start a little bit, sort of sharing your journey a little bit, what the school year has been like for you guys, and what types of experiences you've had, what types of things that, you've kind of gone through as the school year has progressed.
Well, I can start if you want, just because I've had slightly less of a bumpy journey than Kristina, just because I've had a little more, I guess, continuity or less change. So I started out with a group of 26 fifth graders. We all started out completely virtual, just like, most schools in Ingham did. And then in October, I believe, they surveyed families to see which families would be interested in returning in person. And at that point, it was just going to be for half-day cohorts. And at that time, I had 16 of my starting students decide to go in person, and I kept 11 and got 16 new or 15 new students. I ended up with 26 students. I guess it would be, I got kept 10, got 16 new students. And so we went through the whole building a community again with that new group of students. And then since then I've had that same group of students. We've been completely remote. My families, I had one student just this past, it's been maybe a month, I guess. Well, it's been a few weeks since you guys started full day school. So I had one student decide to go back once that full day option was open, and the rest have stayed with me. In January, I added an intern to the mix, a intern from Alma. So that's been interesting. He knew getting into it that he was going to be in a remote situation. We've been getting him into some of the in-person classes as we can also, because we hope next year we'll be back to normal, and that's what his job will hopefully look more normal next year when he's hired. So that's basically been my school year.
So only 2 first days of school for you this year.
Yes, just 2. I'm lucky.
Well, it's all pros and cons, right? Yeah, we've had a few more as the face-to-face teachers, but like Keyan said, we all started remote. So our district made a decision to originally all begin remote. So which was nice, because at the time they made it, we were able then to attend all of the trainings with that in mind. Because for the longest time, we spent a good majority of the summer going, are we going back? Aren't we going back? And do we invest our time in this? Do we not? And finally, when our district kind of made that decision, it made it a lot easier to know that like our PD and what we were doing and working toward was all building on that remote instruction, with some lessons learned from the spring of what to do and what not to do. So at least, I mean, the nice part was we have 6 sections in 3rd grade, and we had all 6 teachers teaching remotely, which allowed us to split up the lessons and not feel the burden as much of creating this brand new curriculum and setting routines and getting those things going. So that was really nice to have the whole team on board for that. And then like Keyan said, around Halloween time is when our district decided that we were going to start bringing students back. And again, what was nice about not jumping into it right away is they were able to kind of look at some lessons from some other districts. And some had been going like the every other day for students and the different options. And our district had chosen to go with the splitting kids into 2 cohorts, a AM and a PM for half days, because it eliminated a lot of things that were teachers' biggest concerns, families' biggest concerns, our biggest concerns, and also what could potentially lead to us flip-flopping back and forth between virtual, which was the food situation. Mm-hmm. And then, the playground situation and those places where you're really mixing kids around and they might be on mass. So we went with a 2.5 hours for AM, 2.5 hours for PM. And that gave time not only to clean in between, but also the kids then were able to be masked the entire time because they didn't need to introduce food into the situation, which was, and it gave teachers, a little bit of a bigger sense of safety, because that first shift going back, I mean, it was scary. We weren't vaccinated at the time. And so I know for me personally, having students in where they were keeping their masks on for those 2.5 hours was a really big deal. So I'm glad our district chose to ease in like that. And I honestly would have been happy to finish the year in that way, but I understand, we had to go back full time at some point or another, but we did make one switch back to virtual.
When most of the state did, right? That was
right. And what
close
was
to Christmas.
Is we were prepared, and we're still prepared that at some point, one of our classrooms could get a case, and we're going to have to switch immediately from face-to-face to, hey, parents, don't send your kids tomorrow. We're going virtual. And I mean, literally since October, I've been holding my breath, waiting for that to happen. And actually, knock on wood, gotta find something. There's my fake wood does, right? But it has not happened yet. Not to say that, we still got the rest of the year. The switch that did happen back to virtual was done through the board. Our board met and decided that Thanksgiving, a lot of people would be gathering, and they just weren't comfortable having kids come back for 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't an emergency shift. We were able to prepare for it, plan for it. It still felt, jarring to the kids, because we had our original online group. Then, like Keyan said, I lost 13 students to virtual and then got, 13 new ones. So I have 23 students in my class. So we had just come back, just felt like we were building that community for a couple weeks, because they were blending. They hadn't been together yet. And I only knew half of them. So, and then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, but I'll see you online. So that one felt interesting, but that's the only time we've been back virtual. So we've been teaching then back face to face with our half day cohorts until March 1st. So March 1st is when they decided to come back. And it kind of went from, hey, we know at some point we're going to be planning on coming back full day, just kind of start sitting with that to, hey, the date's March 1st.
Yeah.
I mean, it came upon, I think, a lot more quickly than a lot of us were anticipating. But now you're in it. You know, once you're in
Right.
it, it's like nothing else ever happens. You just
Yeah.
Yeah,
roll.
and you teach so many routines in elementary school just as it is, right? That explicit instruction of just
Yeah.
behavior and all those things. I can only imagine how much additional routines and policies and just reviewing all of that with kids needed to happen. So I'm curious, what did you have in place? What did you add? Was it coming from leadership? Did you, kind of create your own thing? Did you work with other people in your grade level? Because I'm sure it's a moving target.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, coming back for the half days, I just remember the meetings. There are 4 of us in 3rd grade who are face to face. So I remember having the meetings in that teacher's classroom with just a list of question after question. Are they allowed to share books? Are they allowed to, do they have to bring their own books? I mean, everything was so unknown. So that first round going back half days, I'm not sure which one felt more overwhelming, right? They felt overwhelming for different reasons. So the first time it felt more overwhelming, like you said, to create those routines for how do we get kids to share materials? Are we still allowed to have them, do that collaboration? So much of the classroom is turn and talk to your partner, turn and talk and be engaged. And are they allowed to do that? And then, the kids coming in. So just like any year, when those kids came in for those 2.5 hours, we weren't teaching normal routines like how to play on the playground, how to walk in the hallway. Instead, we were, how do you social distance? How do you make sure if you're working with a partner, you're not, nose to nose? We kind of call it elbow distance, arm distance. We set those different parameters for different things. And I would say very general guidelines came from the district. Most of it kind of came through discussion and just like any elementary teacher would do, thinking about each part of your day and okay, if we're going to come to the carpet, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
How far apart are they going to sit? How are we going to make sure that they keep that space? Transitioning back to the full day for us, adding that lunchtime. Now lunchtime is being eaten in the classroom, and that for me was one of the biggest ones to think through. Luckily, and I think this is huge, any district that hopefully is going from either half days or every other day, we were given an additional work day. So we were given the Friday before that first full day back off. And that was enormous because a big chunk of what I did was I was creating slide decks and other things, going through all the different routines. It literally felt like the first day of school,
Mm-hmm.
even, so not only are you combining 2 groups of kids, so we had to do a lot of, our usual say your name, do the get to know you activities, but then it was also done within the parameters. But I did parameters of, you're squished now, you're so much more crowded. So I know one thing I did was a lot of pre-teaching. I spent that entire week before the first telling kids, remember, next week we're double in size. Remember, next week it's going to be that much more crowded. And we have one-way traffic in our room. So I established that the week before they came back to talk about, okay, if you're going to go get a math game, there's not 11 of you anymore. You can't come at it from all angles or else you're going to be up in each other's, space. So we created one-way traffic around the room. And the whole week before we practiced that. And then practice getting in a line and practice coming. So how is this going to look when we have double? So it was really trying to get them into that headspace of that routine of what is this going to look like when there's twice as many of you. And then that first day back, we had some guidance from our administration in terms of our principal that Friday before we came back shared 4 videos that she made regarding lunch in the classroom, playground behavior, walking in the hallways, and using the bathrooms. Because bathrooms for 2.5 hours versus a full day was, just not as big of an issue. So those were the ones that had some structure from the administration from us, and everything else was kind of on your own. And even within her videos, she'd do the lunch one and then say, and your teacher will give you, the specifics for your classroom. And so having a student with a nut allergy in here, I would say that was one of my biggest fears and anxieties going into it, and still remains my biggest fear and anxiety, is because the kids are allowed to have nut products in the classroom during lunch, And so it's just kind of making sure that those kids follow these new routines of not only cleaning your hands before, but after, cleaning your desk. We do have a custodian who gets 7 minutes per classroom after lunch. But I do have the kids wipe their desk with a wipe on top of it to kind of double clean. And so again, it was all of that thinking through things that I've never thought through in my life of what do I need lunch to look like? It's stay in your own seat, no hallway, only you know what I mean? No visiting, because I can't have them visit other desks, because my one student, if they went to somebody else's desk, you know, that could be, I mean, life and death. So, you know, just really setting those expectations. That's the one I spent the most time on, that like first day. And even right now, we still review every time before lunch starts.
This must really create some resilient kids, both, you know, going back and forth, being in person or virtual. And Keyan, you can probably speak to this too, that, you know, we're just talking about routines that are created for in person, but all of those steps that needed to be taken, you know, when you were virtual. And so can you imagine being a kid, you know, every day, you don't know necessarily what it's going to look like, but I mean, that really has to put them out of their comfort zone. So if anything, the kids are resilient, and, you know, kudos to them for just hanging in there, you know, and that probably really speaks to creating a positive class culture, so that, you know, you kind of have that, like, looking to your virtual or physical partner to say, you know, what do we do here? We got to just get through it together, because, you know, what else can you do?
I think too, I mean, you guys both, I was thinking about how, imagine if a typical school year started that way, where you have half of your kids, you get to walk through all these routines and expectations, and then you have the other half, you get to do the same, and then you combine, like, that could maybe work kind of nicely. But something you guys both have experienced this year is that shift in group. And Allison spoke to this too, about kind of building the culture and rebuilding the community. So I don't know, maybe Keyan, if you want to talk about like how that looked, and when you had to shift your group. For one, they had to relearn you and relearn how you run your classroom. They also had to relearn, you know, the community expectations and the culture that you've built, and that takes some time. And doing that virtually, I imagine, would even be more difficult than setting that up in your classroom in person. So I don't know if you want to speak to that and kind of how you were able to rebuild that connection and get to know your students and have them get to know you during that shift.
Yeah, we started the year, the whole grade level started the year, and I think a lot of the grade levels did the same thing, where we really did not get into much content for the first week or two. It was really a lot of, even more than normal, a lot of learning about each other and doing, you know, different virtual getting to know you activities, talking about the setup and how we would run our virtual classes, going through the different systems. We use Google Classroom. So going through how that would be organized, where they would find their daily schedule or their weekly schedule, and all of those pieces. And so then when we had that new group of students come in, we went back to that, and I did, and actually, again, I think most of the team did something similar, because even those teachers that were going back in person, they wanted to take that opportunity to get to know the students that would be new to them, as well as let those students get to know them and each other. And so again, we put back, you know, we dug through our, you know, what did we not use earlier in the year, which we'd used so many different kind of getting to know you type activities earlier in the year. We kind of scrounged around for some new ideas, and then again, did a lot of that community building piece, getting to know you, and then refreshing, you know, okay, you might have had a teacher who did things this way, or their morning meet times are, all of our live times are in the morning, but each teacher was given a little flexibility as far as like when exactly those live meets were. And so kind of retraining those kids to be like, okay, well, in here, this is when our meet times are, or, your teacher earlier in the year might have had these expectations. Well, these are my expectations for how you complete your work, or going through all of those things. And now it seems like I've had this group from the very beginning of the year. Like I didn't have them at the first few weeks, but it's hard to tell the difference at this point of which students were, with me at the beginning and moved in early November. But I do know that families do feel that, because I've had a conversation with at least a couple different parents that had talked about just the strain of that transition, which I don't think I felt it as much as a teacher, but as on the family end, I think they felt that a little more, where those students got attached to that first teacher and then had to make a transition part of the way through the year. So just, keeping that in mind, those transitions, even if outwardly you don't see that's something that those families are always thinking about.
Yeah. And I think too, like when we think about the number of sort of experimental things that we did this year, I mean, switching students' classes strategically throughout the year is something that was almost unheard of unless there was a really, really extreme need to do it. It would happen, but it would be because, like I had a student with a severe anxiety disorder that needed to get out of the classroom that she was in and got put in my classroom at just a random spot during the year because a change had to be made. Those kinds of things will happen, but like never would we routinely by design take half of every class and just mix them up during the year. And I think that with that, we've learned we can do it, and that there's a model that if necessary, or if it becomes something, now it's a tool in the toolbox, but it's not theory anymore. We get to see what it looks like. We've talked to some parents about what that experience was like, where some teachers have had to deal with that. Is it so bad? Is it not so bad? The same thing with like remote instruction, like let's suppose we see the snowpocalypse come through, as sometimes does, and we know we're going to get 4 or 5 straight days off. Well, now we don't need to go 4 or 5 straight days without any instruction at all. Maybe you give people a snow day or two to shovel themselves out. But if the roads are still no good and we can't hold school, but we've been out 2 days in a row, well, we've all done some remote instruction and we've all done something. Maybe there's a way we can do that. And if we know it's coming.
That goes into a whole nother conversation. That has come up frequently throughout this year. And that is that idea of the technology, because what happened was we don't have one-to-one technology in our district. So each teacher has, each grade level has a Chromebook cart, and each teacher throughout the years has gotten a few from the district, but have mainly written grants on their own to get more. And what happened, of course, was all of those, or almost all of them, had to be distributed for students who needed them, of course. And so now that those students have come back, not until the full day, not until the March 1st, because the kids still needed them. When we were doing half days, they still needed their Chromebooks at home to do their asynchronous. But now the in-person teachers have had to collect those from the full day. So we had actually, as a district, gone to a policy where if there was a snow day, all students, including those half-day in-person students, were back online. So we had some backup lessons created, which was, a whole unique thing this year. But now, if we were to have, let's say, a power outage day, because this insane wind storm that we're having right now, our in-person students, we couldn't do that, because even though not all of the students had Chromebooks from school, we would be creating a have and a have not situation. Correct. Where we have some kids that don't have the technology at home. So, that's something that's so interesting, is now we are, like you said, we now have the knowledge for the how to do it, but we are still lacking
not equipped.
The equity and fairness of that. If we were to say, hey, we're having this 5-day snowpocalypse, we're going to offer some online lessons so your kids don't get behind. Now we're offering it to the families that have technology.
Right.
Well, or even just the issue of internet access. I mean, it's insane. Williamston, it's a more rural area, and there are so many, even the families that chose to stay remote. Some of them, there are days where, for some random reason, it's their internet is spotty,
yeah.
and they, you know, are having trouble accessing those live meets. So it's the same kind of that, like, we have some of that experience and know-how, but we lack some of the hardware that we need.
Because even with those families, you could give them a Chromebook. Okay, I got a Chromebook. We are equipped. We got gear. Internet's down. Like, my Chromebook's just sitting here. Like, yeah.
What does that look like for you as the teachers, if just to prepare for that sort of scenario in which, you know, you thought you were going to be in person and you're virtual, or you thought you were going to be virtual and now you're in person? Like, how does your daily lessons or just your plan for instruction evolve or change? Or are you, what you're doing kind of in either scenario, does it translate easily? What have you kind of approached that, like, you never know what you're going to get kind of day?
Well, I think for Keyan, knowing, you know, that she was remote all year, I don't want to speak for you, but yours would just continue because nothing is going to change in that case. We've had all sorts of different things. We call it our sudden change plans. That's our like official title of it. Sudden change plan. And so we've had different layers of that this year, you know, just one of those crazy things never thought you'd have to think through. But our original one, of course, was when we came back half days, we had to be ready, like you said, to shift to virtual if needed. We all thought, you know, the most likely scenario would be that one of our classrooms would have a case and we would have to shut down for 2 weeks. But we still, this is an advantage of having multiple sections of each grade level. We had 2 teachers who were remote. Still. So we've got 4 third grade face-to-face teachers, and we have 2 full-time remote teachers. So those teachers, we used to all 6 share the lessons. Those teachers are now 2 teachers creating all the brand new math, reading, writing online assignments. And when we did, in fact, have to put that into action, when the board decided after Thanksgiving we were not going to come back to school for 2 weeks, instead of us then creating new content, we were gifted with the fact that we had these amazing 2 other teachers who already had those lessons because, you know, they're working a week, 2-3 weeks ahead. So we actually went right back to what we had done in the fall, and we're assigning those lessons from our other remote teachers. So we were hosting the live teaching. We went right back to reading groups. So we were still, of course, you know, instructing our class in that way. But if we had to create all the content for it, I can't even imagine. That would have been so much.
Well, and that wasn't a sudden change.
That one wasn't
sense either. Like, we kind of knew that was coming.
There's a second layer to our sudden change plan. So that one we did, you know, because the board voted, we did get a little bit more notice. Coming. But that's that one. So then what happened was, then we had to be prepared once they canceled, you know, the snow days, that if we had inclement weather, you know, kids would now receive this instruction from home. But one of the obstacles with that, even though we would have had the lessons from our other third grade teachers, one, they were now at a different, enough time had gone by that they were not aligned quite as well as before of where we were. 2, we knew that some parents had said that they weren't going to have their children participate, that they wanted their children to have snow days as snow days.
Sure.
And again, so if we assigned, say, a math lesson, that we then used from one of the ones that was created, we really knew we were creating a situation where when we came back face to face, we're going to teach that lesson again.
Yeah.
So what we created were review opportunities that we knew were important for all kids. Yeah. So like solving multi-step problems in math, that's a huge one that we cover all year. So ahead of time, we created a folder that had these like a choice board that had also their math lesson for the day, that was like a review opportunity, a reading thing, so just more generic. And so in those cases, and we did use 3 of them. Did we have 3 sudden change days? Gosh, I think we created 3 sets of lessons, and I think honestly we used all 3. Or I
better not, no more.
It, but it was minimum of 2. We might have used all 3. It was crazy. And so, yeah, we went and we had an email ready for families saying, your kids, they know how to get to Google Classroom. Everything will be posted like it always is. I'll see them at this 9:30 class meeting to walk them through everything. And we just kind of had it all prepped in advance so it wouldn't become, so overwhelming in that case. But now, sudden change number 3, if say somebody got a case in my class and they said, hey, Mrs. Foley, you're off tomorrow. I think we might get a grace period of a day or so, because 1, we would have to get computers back to all my kids.
Yep.
Who need them. So I couldn't do anything, even if I was all ready. There'd have to be at least 1 day off for those parents to come. Again, equity, right? Those parents to come pick it up. And then, I think this part is more, what do we think we do? We probably have to, again, pull from our thankfully, we're so lucky to have them,
right.
Pull from the archives of what our remote teachers are doing and, use their resources.
That's great that you're having like a team approach to it, whether you're in person or virtually. And I wonder, Keyan, if you were told that you were going to go back in person tomorrow, what might your instruction look like? Or how would you translate what you're doing virtually to in person? Do you feel like it would be drastically different? Or are there elements of what you're doing now that you would maintain or continue to practice?
I have tried in a lot of the instruction, I've tried to adapt what I would do in person normally as much as I can to virtual. Like I've tried early in the year, the way that the schedule was set up for the school, it seemed to be more of a flipped classroom model where like we would record our lessons and kids would supposedly watch them. And then we would have a wrap up at the end after they had watched their lessons and done some independent practice. Well, thankfully, YouTube shows us how many views we have or don't. And so soon, like we kind of learned, like they're not really watching. And so I have gone to basically doing live virtual instruction. And then they do their independent practice after, just kind of like I would in class. Like we would have a mini lesson for math, and then they go do their practice, and we do a wrap up. And reading, we do a live mini lesson together, and then they go do their practice. So I don't know. There would be more paper and pencil involved because we wouldn't have access to all the technology that they have right now in class. But other than that, I think that the 5th grade team has tried to stay pretty closely aligned as far as what we're teaching, what we're covering. So I think it would be fairly, similar.
So I'm curious, since, like you guys have collaborated with your teammates and this and the other thing, like what have you seen as far as like, well, the remote teachers seem to be having a better time of it with these kinds of things, but boy, the in-person teachers seem to be having a lot better time of it with these kinds of things. Like, what would you say remote instruction really thrives with this kind of thing or whatever? But we really got to get back to face for this kind of stuff because boy, they're really having a better time of it here.
I know that it's really difficult to have kids do like the little turn and talk type thing that we would do in class or group work. Even with breakout rooms, it's so hard to get. Some kids in some groups do fabulously, but some, like I'll pop into their breakout room and there's like no talking.
There's no talking. Their Google Docs
cameras
totally
are
blank.
Off. Like they're not doing,
yeah.
Or they're in the breakout room and I see stuff like they're on their Jamboard and they're moving stuff around and typing messages to each other. I'm like, you guys can unmute and talk to each other.
That's right. That's right.
So I think that it's so much harder to you can't have that big picture of that you do in person when the kids are doing their turn and talks or are working in group, and you can just kind of you can't easily scan the room and see what's going on. So I definitely see that as being a benefit. Although then you're probably like, oh, you're too close, back away.
Sure.
So
Well,
right
Tim,
now there's a difference.
Yeah, a previous guest we talked to in one of our other episodes was saying that like you were talking about when your new students come in and you've got to reteach them some of your procedures and some of your tech tools that maybe you use but other teachers don't lean as heavily on, and walking through those procedures and how tricky that was. In a face-to-face setting, that's not as tricky because they can just look at their partner and see and just do what he does. And just like for all that stuff, if you bring in 10 new kids, just do it. The rest of them, they all know what they're doing. They'll model it for you. Whereas it's really not as much of a culture, a collection or a community as easily. It's a bunch of individuals on box screens. So like that gets at exactly what you're talking about, that collaborative community kind of cooperative learning type setup. This is not a great facilitator. The camera and the mic aren't a great facilitator for those kinds of interactions. So
I think a benefit of remote that the in-person people don't have right now is, especially right now that they just moved to in-person, these kids are not used to being in seats or in masks for a full school day. That we can kind of still keep covering our regular curriculum at the pace that we had been previously. We can still get in social studies and science and all of those other things. And I think that what those in-person kids and teachers are dealing with is they have to build in so many more breaks than maybe they had when they were on that different schedule, just because the kids just, you can't go from wearing a mask and having to focus for 2.5 hours to a regular full school day. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, so a big part of what Keyan's saying, right? The relationships are huge, right? You really feel like you're able to have those connections better when they're in person. I mean, there's just no comparison to a kid turning and talking to their partner, the energy, the being able to the eye contact, those pieces to have that collaboration and to, hey, go help so-and-so do this and to have those pieces back. But when I had said before that we're no longer quite aligned with our 2 virtual teammates, it's not because we're not covering the same curriculum. It's that we've had all these stops, these sudden change days, the back to, all these pieces. And so we've gotten slowly behind where they are. So they've been able to continue, and keep moving forward. Whereas, we've had these stalls and starts and like Keyan said too, on top of it, even though we're back for 7 hours, we didn't come back and go, and now we're going to add every subject. It's still, we are still focusing on the core. We're still solid math, reading, writing, and sprinkling what else we can, because every day we're still practicing these routines and we're still working on that. Oh, we really struggled in line today. Let's stop and review what it means to be distanced in line and those pieces. So we can't, like Keyan said, add all those pieces. So they were able to have that continuity and keep going. And we've gotten, a little bit further behind in the curriculum. And I am going to circle back to something that you said a while ago, Andrew, that I realized I just don't want to gloss over it, because I think it's a huge subject, and that is the resiliency of these kids. When you said you talked about those starts and stops, and I just want to say, there's a lot of honor and recognition from all of the teachers, whether the kids are staying virtual or whether they're in person, that we are constantly trying to have class meetings and talk to them about, this is huge, you guys. People haven't been through this before. It's new for me. I've never been through it before. And really honoring. I mean, I'm constantly right now, when we're having these meetings and pieces, saying, I get it. Like, this is not easy. This is hard for Mrs. Foley to wear this all day. We're constantly just really, really trying to recognize, we can't pretend that this is normal for kids. This is different than everything they've ever experienced. So really allowing kids to just be able to talk about, because we'll do some journaling. What do you think? We just journaled the other day that just, hey, spend a few minutes. What do you think is going well now that we're back? What's not going well? And a lot of them were like, I hate wearing my mask all day. And they're saying, we get it, and we get why we have to, but we hate it. And it's just, we hate it.
That's where I'm at too.
We're allowed to hate it. That's right. You know what I mean? like I have 8 and 9-year-olds. So it's a lot of honoring, recognizing, allowing them to have that. They didn't come back and we're not like, this is how it's going to be. It was a lot of like, how are we feeling about things? Let's check it. Let's check our temperature. What's working today? What's not working today? So I just want to make sure these kids are superstars. The fact that they have been able to, weather something that nobody's ever done in history. And they're just so happy. Like the kids that are back, they're just so happy to see their friends. I've never seen kids more grateful to come to school, in my entire life. It's just, they're really happy and they're grateful, but they're also, they talk about, being nervous and scared and, all of those mixed emotions. It's a big deal for them.
No, and sorry, I insist.
Oh, I was just going to second what Kristina was saying. We start every day with a class meeting and do check-ins, and it's not a week goes by that I don't hear from at least one student saying like, oh, I hate this. I hate COVID, because my kids are on the other end where they miss their friends. Mm-hmm. They wish that they were back in person, and for whatever reason, they aren't right now. And so this transition for those kids, we've been trying to do what we can to support them and try to add in fun pieces and, extra little community building activities, from what we can do virtually, because we know that they recognize that some of their classmates are now back in person for full days. And it was the same thing when we went back to when we started and offered even those half-day cohorts. There was a lot of talking with them and just recognizing that, like, yeah, I know it stinks. I miss seeing my friends too, and being able to, give hugs and all of that stuff that, we're used to. So.
And I feel that in a lot of ways, I feel the same way about the teachers that I've been supporting through this whole thing too. Like, I understand that in general, adults do a better job through practice and maturity of regulating their emotions and some of that. And that's true. It's different when you're dealing with 8 and 9-year-olds, but at the same time, like the anxiety, the pressure, the unsureness, the consistent sense of transition, the difficulty in forecasting your futures, like even in the very short term, like there were times when people were planning a week at a time because they did not know what next week was going to look like. We'll get into next week, and that kind of stuff has created different networks of communication, different ways and trust of working and collaborating with one another, different reliance on tools and different ways of communicating so that you're able to put pressure on each other in productive ways as opposed to destructive ways. There's been such a sense of consistent growth that's had to happen through this whole thing that I've been insanely impressed all the way through at reflecting at how the word resilient just makes the most sense, but almost, the word, so there's a book that uses the term anti-fragile, which is different than resilient. So like the difference between, I'll just give it quick. The difference between a sippy cup, which if you knock it off the ground, it doesn't break, but it doesn't get any stronger because it's taken that adversity. Whereas like an immune system is anti-fragile. If you stress it, it actually gets stronger, or your muscles during a workout, for example, right? Slightly different. And I wonder if it's not clear to me what I'm observing in our system, whether it's resilience in the proper sense that we can take some strain and struggle and continue to move forward, or if it's actually anti-fragility in the sense that if as we've absorbed this struggle and worked through it and kind of embraced it and moved and worked within it, if we come out the other side in the fall stronger. And it's not clear to me what that is yet, because we'll have to see what we're like in the fall, which is kind of where I want to go next, is like, what does the fall look like for you guys? So we've been through this whole experience, and the fall, we obviously don't know what format we'll be in necessarily, although we're hopeful for things, but like, no way we're all the same educators we were in fall of 2021 than we were in 2019. So like, what do you think you see yourselves bringing with you as we start to move out of this and into something that's the post-COVID world?
I would like to think, I mean, I definitely have learned so many more technological tools. And I used Google Classroom quite a bit even before COVID. I was lucky, in that I was pretty familiar with it, but I've learned so many different tips and tricks as far as organizing things and how to post things so they're more user-friendly for the students. I think the difficult piece will be, like Kristina said, we'd written all these grants for all these devices that we had in our classrooms. And I had 12 in my room. So I was about halfway there. I was there to about, you could share with partners. But, those had all been sent out for students to use, and we don't know what of those will get back or what condition they will be in, or how many devices we're going to end up with. So I have a lot of technology tools I can use if I have the technology to use them with next year. I think that's the big question for me.
And I think for me, when I'm thinking about the fall, I'm going to optimistically assume that we're going to continue to be full day face-to-face. And so part of, what I'm considering is right now, there's just these small things that are different. Like, of course, eating lunch in the classroom is a big difference. And that's a lot of responsibility on a teacher, especially when it comes to allergies that we haven't, necessarily had before. But also even, how our rooms arranged, things pulled apart. And that's a loss of flexible seating that I've always had in my room, where I have bins of pillows and, small beach chairs and other things. I mean, those are off limits this year. They're actually stored next door in the virtual teacher's classroom. I mean, I feel like a third of my class, poor girl, is like taking up her space and that she's nice enough to let me use. So just even, really small things like that have made a difference for kids over the years. We know that flexible seating has always helped promote being able to work in their space that they need. But this year that's off limits. So are we going to be able to bring back, more of those things next year? Or is it going to continue to be a mask on, distanced classroom? That's more of like the uncertainty. I'm going to stay positive that we're going to get, more people vaccinated, and hopefully we'll be able to continue that full day face-to-face instruction. But, I don't know that we're going to have a normal or traditional start to the fall.
Well, it will be very interesting as we do. So, okay. We've done this school year has been difficult, of course, for a lot of reasons. And that's an understatement, of course, because there's been just a lot of different types of struggles. But one of the things that I'm encouraged by is the ability that we've had through this almost day to day to stay connected to our students, and for teachers to stay connected to each other so that they're able to maintain a sense of community. That's really what's keeping a lot of this going, is that we've got the ability to lean on each other to some degree. We've got the ability to keep getting feedback from our youngsters so that we know kind of what they need, what they're feeling, how to support them as best they can, when we can push them and when we need to kind of pull back off of the pressure a little bit. The amount of surveying that districts are doing to their communities, all of that stuff, it's as if for a moment we all just stopped assuming that anybody could understand anything, and we'll just ask. We'll just ask what they're thinking and what they're feeling and how it's going, and then try to mix that all together and make the best possible decision that we could, knowing that all the decisions that we have to choose from aren't very great. And when I think of what that has done, I think in a lot of cases it's created a lot of exhaustion, and there's no doubt about that. But that exhaustion, I think, is the result of the fact that we've all been on heightened sense of learning, creating, innovating, responding all year long, an entire year of that. I can remember training people on something. I can't remember what it was, so forgive me, this is a terrible story. But in February, and people were still in intense creativity mode. February is usually that spot in the school year where you kind of find a corner to catch your breath in and the routines kind of carry themselves toward the warmer weather, and then we kind of get energized again. Whereas there was no corner to hide in this year. You had to stay on your game all year, every day, not sure what was going to happen. And that's tiring, but it has also, I think, I've been super impressed with the ability that teachers have had to actually complete that task, that met that challenge, to look at it and say, all right, that's what we got to do. We're going to do it. We'll figure out how. And you have. And listening to you guys share your story from two different perspectives and recognizing the intense collaboration that your school has and the ways that you guys are sharing all this stuff with really positive energy. You know, you're laughing a little bit as you're telling the stories. It just feels like, Kristina says she's feeling hopeful for the fall. I think there's a lot of reason for optimism, regardless of what. I think that we just are going to be okay. So thank you so much for sharing those with us. So, okay, let's see here. Christy, want to wrap up?
Kristina thought we were, yeah.
Other one. Yeah.
The other one. Sorry. I got two Christies on the call.
I know. Sorry about that.
Christy with a C.
With the C. Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you guys for taking the time to meet with us and share your story. I know that those who get to hear the story will learn a lot from it and relate to a lot of it as well. Andrew talked about this as well, but I was just thinking about, we've all seen the quotes of, growth happens when you're forced outside of your comfort zone. And usually that happens in just little small phases. I'm going to try something new because I'm ready to, not because I'm forced to, but we've all been forced to do things that are outside of our comfort zone this year. And I'm hopeful not only for what the fall looks like, but hopeful that some of that growth that occurred within our teachers will maintain and we'll be able to use those things that we learned because we were forced to learn them once things do return back to normal. But we've all been put in these uncomfortable situations as educators. Our children and our students have done so too, but we've also had to maintain that consistency for them and let them know that they are safe and that we are here for them and that they will be okay. So my gosh, that's like two opposite extremes. We're not feeling great as educators. We have to make sure that our students are feeling okay. And gosh, everyone has done such a great job with that. So, props to you guys for gosh, we're in March now and we're on the downhill slope of this school year. And I just want to give you guys props for what you've done this year.
Okay, Christy with a K. You want to wrap up?
All right. Yeah. Gosh, I appreciate what both of you are saying so much about Andrew speaking to those the collaboration that needed to happen. I mean, we've always had a strong team or a strong grade level team, but I know my team has spent a lot of this year saying thank you to each other. We couldn't have done it without each other. I mean, my team of 6 over here, there's, like I said, when we had to go back virtual, we couldn't have done it without our full-time virtual teachers. When we've had to go back face-to-face, I don't know what I would have done if I was on my own. So I think a renewed sense of appreciation of our colleagues and how much we are truly able to depend on each other in times of crisis. And I think the other thing is, I just know this whole year, right, it's been adrenaline packed. We've been going. Okay, what's coming next? All right, what are we doing? And I think for me, a renewed sense of a focus on relationships with my colleagues, relationships with my family and my friends, and then of course classroom-based relationship with my students. I keep trying to remind myself, because some days I feel like we aren't remembering. We're in a pandemic. Like, this has never happened. These kids are going through things they've never been through before. We as teachers are running just this sprint. It's not, I would say, it's a marathon, not a sprint. This year, it's been a sprint, just a nonstop, no time to stop and catch your breath, no time to stop and think, is this working? Is it not working? It's just go. And so for me, every day, truly, I have been saying, I'll get to what I get to content-wise, what are my relationships? How are my kids feeling? Checking in with them, reminding them how incredible they are because of what they're going through, and just acknowledging the fact that this is not a normal school year, and it's okay to have all the feelings you want to have about it, and it's okay for Mrs. Foley to have those feelings about it, and just that renewed focus. So even the fall, no matter what comes, I mean, for me, I'm just really, really trying to remember that if we have that foundation, if we have the relationships with all of the people around us, if those are the things that we focus on and care about the most, we're going to get through anything, as long as we make that, I think, the priority.
Allison, you want to wrap up?
Yeah, thanks for joining us today and telling your story. To echo what a lot of you have been saying, this makes me think of, I don't know, kind of using the McCall conference as a metaphor. I don't know if I'm thinking that just because that's this week, but you leave that conference or any ed tech conference or professional development with, a lot of great information, tools, resources, and you think, gosh, I'm a little overwhelmed. Like, how am I going to implement all these things? Well, you take it in pieces and take one thing at a time. Well, teachers this year have kind of taken everything they learned from a McCall conference and just did it all in 1 year. And so the amount of growth, I think, is impressive, but also important to reflect on and appreciate and remind yourself, in a day, in a month, in a year from now, to say, look how far we've come. And I think that speaks to what I was saying earlier about resiliency, not just for students, but also for teachers, that it is amazing what you've done this year, and just, hopefully gives you confidence to, look to the future and say, gosh, if I did that in 1 year, I can do a lot more. So thanks for sharing your story.
Keyan, want to wrap up?
Sure. So yeah, I agree with everything that you guys have been saying. Going from a year ago, most of even the teachers, let alone students, he had no knowledge of video conferencing technology, and now that is their mode, at least for some students, that's their main mode of learning. And just seeing all the growth that, like you guys have said, not just the teachers and staff, but the students have made. It's been amazing. And I'm hopeful that we're not, like Andrew said, it's not just resilience. I'm hoping for that it's the anti-fragility that we're dealing with here, and we all come out stronger for it at the other side.
Ian Roberts and Kristina Foley from Explorer Elementary in Williamston. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Be sure to check out our full Digital Instruction Network playlist, as well as our 517 EdTech website. And follow us on Twitter, #517EdTech. And if you'd like to join our mailing list, be sure to go to this link.